Welcome to Amazon FinSpace. Amazon FinSpace is a data management and analytics service for the financial services industry. FinSpace reduces the time it takes to discover, transform, and manage access to data. What used to take months now takes minutes. By providing your analysts with self-service access to their data, they will have more time to spend on analysis. Let's dive into how Amazon FinSpace works. First, we need to navigate to our unique application URL, and then log into our FinSpace application. Note that the application doesn't require access to the AWS console, but instead maintains its own user database and permissions. This makes it easy to provide access to coworkers, contractors, or your customers. Authentication can be configured to allow FinSpace to provide login credentials, or you can use single sign-on with your own identity provider via SAML. Amazon FinSpace starts with data. Data is ingested from various data sources either via an API or a direct upload and becomes a dataset in Amazon FinSpace. Each dataset is represented by one or more views into the data. A data view determines how the dataset is accessed and presented. We'll talk about views in more detail later in the video. The data catalog helps you find the data you want. Once you've found the right data, you can then open a view of the data in a Jupyter Notebook for further analysis and manipulation. On the FinSpace application homepage, you can browse and search for data, see recent data views you've created, and find helpful tutorials and other resources. This environment is currently populated with capital market sample data, which is included for you to try out the service. Let's check it out. Your datasets are sorted by attributes you select, allowing you to browse for data that matches what you're looking for. Let's dive into the data tagged as an asset class. Then we can keep drilling down, find our equity offerings, and finally common stocks. You can see that there are several datasets available that match the criteria. However, rather than browsing, you can also use free-form queries to search for the data you need. For example, let's look for 5-minute bars. Once you have the results you're looking for, you can further refine the list. This takes us to the data summary. This is where you can see information about the data, as well as configure how it's accessed and processed. For now, let's just take a look at where the data is analyzed once it's found. So, we select Analyze in Notebook. A new browser tab opens with a read-only Jupyter Notebook that is pre-configured to help start your analysis. We'll copy the notebook so we can start using it. There's code to connect to the FinSpace cluster where the notebook will retrieve data, as well as loading the data specific to the view we're interested in. The data can then be loaded into an Apache Spark data frame, which you can query with the Spark API or SQL commands. From here, you can run further analysis and manipulation. Of course, the real power of FinSpace is the self-service ability to find, access, and process your own data. Let's take a look at how to do that. You would typically add or update data in the application with an automated process using the AWS SDK. However, you can also add data ad hoc by uploading standard CSV files, which will automatically be parsed into a data field via its schema. You can also add other types of files like PDF or text that can be cataloged alongside your parsable data. Let's add a CSV file which contains history of the treasury spread. Once we've selected the file, if needed, we can edit the schema of the incoming data. Now that the data has been uploaded, a view of the data is automatically created. Let's edit the dataset description to be more concise. Next, we're going to set up the attributes that tag the data for browsing in different categories. Before we add the attributes, let's get a better understanding of what attribute sets are and how they work. The sample data comes with a pre-configured attribute set. Let's take a look at it. You can think of an attribute set as a schema of how data can be tagged. The attribute set describes what attributes can be applied to the data, not the values of the attributes themselves. You can see that it contains several attribute types like asset class, source, event type, etc. Taking a quick look at the configuration, you can see that we can add or remove attributes, set them to be required or optional, and if the attribute will be used during search. At the bottom, you can see that you can select different attribute types that can be added. The simplest is the data attribute. Data can be a number, string, or Boolean, and can be set to any value that fits the type. Categories allow you to define a hierarchy, which you can use to drill down and find very specifically tagged views. You saw this in action earlier when we browsed to find views that included common stocks. Controlled vocabularies allow you to create a specific list of values that can be assigned to an attribute, for example, a list of US states. Now that we have a better understanding of attributes, let's assign some to our data view. We'll add the sample data attribute set. Once that's added, we can start assigning values to the attributes. You may have noticed that we can create different views into the same dataset. New views allow you to determine how the view into the data is updated, accessed, partitioned, and sorted. Views can be static and disallow future changes, so they are a snapshot of a specific time. This can provide a historical view that would be useful for backtesting. Otherwise, views will be automatically updated as data is appended or corrected. You can determine if the view is meant to be used in the notebook directly, or if it will be available through an API to any consumer. You can partition out specific columns of the data. That doesn't make much sense here, but for data with many columns, you can choose the partition, which can improve performance for large datasets depending on how you query the data. You can also select if the data should be presented in a sorted order or not. As mentioned, you can append or replace data in a dataset. Any view that is configured to auto-update will return the up-to-date data when it's modified. The update history allows you to quickly see when and how the data has been modified. As you'll see later, this can also be included in a report, which is useful for compliance and auditing. The Schema tab is useful as a reference to see how the data will be structured when making queries. The final tab, Permissions, gives you fine-grained control on who can access the dataset, as well as how they can access it. Permissions groups allow you to assign different sets of people with different access levels. You can see it's easy to add users. Group permissions allow you to control what the group can do with the data. This configuration is quite permissive, however, that can be easily configured. You can also see what datasets this group has access to, which can help make decisions about what groups can access what. We've already touched on some configuration with categories, but let's take a more complete look at what's configurable in the FinSpace application. Here we can create and edit a controlled vocabulary. Let's make it days of the week. We create a new vocabulary, name it, then add our days as fields. Now, let's add the days of the week attribute to our sample data attribute set. In permission settings, we can add or remove users and modify their permission groups. It's easy to create a new user. Let's invite Helen Wu as a regular user. We can now email Helen with a URL to our application, along with temporary credentials. We can immediately assign her to a permission group as well. You can also add new groups or edit existing group permissions. Note that you have fine-grained control over what data, features, and configuration a group is able to access. This includes allowing or limiting access to application operations, such as the setting of permissions or attribute creation. API credentials are used to allow external software access to your FinSpace API. The audit report is a valuable tool for keeping track of activity in your FinSpace application. Every change in access activity is logged and can be reported. You can select any time period, see the activity of specific users or specific datasets. Once a report is complete, you can see the first 20 entries in the interface and download the report as a CSV file for further analysis. Amazon FinSpace supports your organization's compliance requirements by allowing you to specify and enforce your data access controls and maintaining audit logs. Last but not least, let's see how we create a FinSpace from the AWS console. Simply create a new environment, select a key to encrypt data stored by the application, and select an authentication method, either an email and password provided by the application, or single sign-on with your own identity provider. Once the environment is ready, add at least one super user to administrate the FinSpace. Super users are users with elevated administrative privileges. Using the FinSpace application, a super user can create and manage both users and super users, and access all data stored in the application. Once the super user has been added, just click the unique domain link to get started. For more information, and to get started with Amazon FinSpace, please visit our website.